Welcome to the Francis Crick Institute here at King's Cross in central London. Now, when this place is finished, fitted out and open for business later this year, it will be the biggest building in the whole of Europe devoted to biomedical research. It's a £650 million statement of Britain's commitment to solving problems, improving lives and to the future. So, where better to interview our political leaders than here on their plans for solving problems, for improving lives and for Britain's future. Tonight, it's the turn of Nick Clegg, leader of the Liberal Democrats and Deputy Prime Minister. Nick Clegg. This time, during the last election campaign, there was that so-called Clegg mania, people comparing you to Winston Churchill. I think it's fair to say it's been pretty well downhill since then for you. Just tell us about how you felt in this journey from hero to zero.
Well, that's a charming way of putting it. I wouldn't quite put it like that. Well, look, clearly I'm the leader of a political party which had never been in government before, took a controversial decision to form a coalition government, a controversial thing to do in the traditional two-party politics of our country. And then, if you like, doubly controversial because clearly in government at a time, in keeping with many governments around the developed world, when we're having to, we've had to take some extraordinarily difficult, downright unpopular decisions to try and kind of stabilise and rescue the economy, given the very perilous state in which the economy was when we came to office. So I think, in a sense, no surprises that is something which brings with it controversy and that some people do not like. But actually, looking back on it, I'm incredibly proud of what has been achieved, because the country, I think, was in an extraordinarily sort of precarious position 5 years ago.
We'll get a chance to talk about this, but let's look back on it and go back to that election campaign, because I want to play you a little clip now of one of your party election broadcasts during the last election. We found a bootleg copy. We'll just play a short clip. Here it is.
Broken promises. There have been too many in the last few years, too many in the last 30 years. In fact, our nation has been littered with them, a trail of broken promises. I believe it's time to do things differently. I believe it's time for fairness in Britain. I believe it's time for promises to be kept. You want me to respond? Well, I mean, I know exactly what you're going to quite rightly ask. Famously, infamously, the Liberal Democrats were not able to put in place one of our policy commitments from last time, which was on tuition fees. But I hope when you look at your well-thumbed copy of the Liberal Democrat manifesto from 2010, from the time at which that broadcast was made, you'll find that there were 4 priorities we put on the front page of our manifesto, which we treated almost like a sort of a tablet. No, it's quite important I should say this, because I quite rightly am reminded of one policy that we were not able to put into practice. I think I'm entitled to say that actually the things that we said at the time we would stick to through thick or thin, we have done. We said at that time that if you voted for the Liberal Democrats, you would pay no income tax on the first £10,000 you earn. Actually, you pay no income tax now on the first £10,600 you earn. More money for disadvantaged kids in school, rescuing the economy and pushing for political reform. So clearly, as a leader of a political party with 8% of MPs in the House of Commons, I'm clearly not Prime Minister, I couldn't implement the manifesto in full.
You couldn't do everything you wanted, but I think you might have just slightly got away with this argument that you only broke a promise on tuition fees. Everybody knows about tuition fees. This is what you said about austerity in the election campaign. We think that merrily slashing now is an act of economic masochism. My 8-year-old son ought to be able to work this out. You shouldn't start slamming on the brakes when the economy is barely growing. You then entered a government which did that. You had posters up saying the Tories are going to put up VAT. You were part of a government that put up VAT.
Actually, just hang on the important issue of saving money. I actually think that any economist will tell you that what we've done over the last several years hasn't been some great radical slash and burn approach, as the Conservatives now seem to wish to do if they were left to their own devices. Actually, we've been relatively measured in trying to balance the balance. In fact, we're criticised by some people for not reducing the deficit quickly enough. And when I discovered 2 or 3 years ago that we were not able to balance the books by the end of the Parliament as we'd originally intended, far from sort of chasing our tail, taking more and more money away away from schools and hospitals. I said no, we're going to take a little longer to balance the books. So of course everyone knows we need to balance the books, but we need to do it in a measured way, which is exactly what we've done.
I think you can see why people who heard you say slashing now would be an act of masochism, and my 8-year-old son understands that it won't work.
Well, hang on.
I think people hearing that would be entitled to say, that was not the government you ended. Actually, as a matter of fact, if anyone had to rely on our support and we were involved in government, of course, we would say no to that.
I'll take on the chin what you say about tuition fees. I won't actually accept that at all, because if you look at our manifesto in 2010, we were more explicit than any party about the spending reductions and indeed the tax increases which were necessary in order to balance the books. We had the largest peacetime deficit, for generations. So of course we needed to balance the books.
A lot of your voters last time round, let's think about them. A lot of them voted for you because they didn't want a Tory government. And a lot of them feel they got a Tory government. They wanted a change. They didn't want Gordon Brown to carry on.
Well, hang on.
But they've got a right-wing government. Now, do you feel...
No, they didn't get a right-wing government.
You think it hasn't been a right-wing government?
Absolutely not. And I'll tell you what, and the proof is in what the Conservatives are now saying they would do if they were left to their own devices.
So anyone who thinks it was a right-wing government should clearly not vote for you, because that would obviously show that they're completely on a different planet from where you are. You do not think it's been a right-wing government.
Of course, I'm a Liberal Democrat. I don't represent the right wing or the left wing. I represent the centre wing.
So the cut in the 50p tax, the 80-20 split of... the austerity being burdened on spending cuts rather than tax rises. Let me take the bedroom tax, NHS reform, free schools.
Can I take some of those?
You don't think it's a right-wing government?
Can I take some of those? Right?
Very briefly.
Okay, well, the first one you say, reducing the top rate, the higher rate of income tax from 50 to 45. 45p is 5p higher than it was under every single year of the Labour government. The Labour government higher rate of income tax, as you know, was 40p. We have set it at 45p. The Conservatives said to me that they wanted to bring it down to 40p. I said no. 80-20, in other words, reducing spending by 80% and having 20% made up for balancing the books from tax rises, is almost exactly what every mainstream economist around the world now recommends. It's the Conservatives who are now saying that if they were left to their own devices, they would do everything through spending reductions, and more regressively still, they would take £12 billion, the vast bulk of the adjustments they want to make, from the working age poor. So don't take it from me, take it from the Conservatives, that if we were not there, the Liberal Democrats were not there, you bet you'd have an unbridled right-wing government, which I would not agree with at all.
You are proud of the government's record. I just want to be clear on this. You are proud of the government's record, bedroom taxes and all these things, NHS reforms.
Do I?
You're proud of the government's record. You stand on that record. I just want to be 100% clear. Yes, you do.
Of course I do. Of course there
are... people who hate the government shouldn't vote for you, and people who like the government should say, this guy is for me.
If you just give me a word in edgeways, of course, understandably, there are individual decisions which I didn't like to take. I didn't come into government to make cuts and savings, and there are individual decisions that, with hindsight, one could change here or there. The overall record, am I proud of the fact that after 5 years we now have more people in work than ever before, more women in work than ever before, we've doubled the number of apprenticeships, we've taken more than 3 million people out of paying any income tax, we've provided free healthy lunches for little toddlers at school, we put £2.5 billion through the pupil premium into schools to educate us.
Well, hang on. End the sentence with, hell yes, I'm proud of this.
Well, hell yes, I am proud of it. I am proud. I tell you why, because memories are very short. The election last 5 years ago, since you asked, took place on a Thursday. I remember vividly that weekend there were flames on the streets of Athens. There were demonstrations. Alistair Darling was flying to emergency meetings in Brussels. There was a real sense that we were going to be the next domino to fall. If the Liberal Democrats had not taken that plucky decision to pick up the baton of government and govern this country, we would now have mass unemployment, people would face higher interest rates, and I wouldn't want that on my conscience.
Let's talk about the relationship to the Conservatives and, if you like, the personal relationships between you and David Cameron over the last few years. Do you trust David Cameron?
We have a working partnership which has worked much better over the last 5 years than I think anybody anticipated.
Do you trust him?
Well, there has to be a certain modicum of trust in a working relationship. But, you know, I'm like anybody else who works, if you like, works with people I don't necessarily agree with. I don't want to pry, but there might even be people in the BBC team who you don't agree with, but you nonetheless rub along because you have to do things for the wider whole, for the wider team. And that is what we both decided to do in 2010. No one got a complete majority. It is not a Conservative government. It is not a Liberal Democrat government. It is a coalition government. It is what it says on the tin. Two parties led by two individuals who have different views and visions and instincts about the country, but nonetheless set aside those differences in order to do something at a time of outright economic emergency. Have we crossed swords? Yes. Have there been low points and high points? Of course there have.
Tell me about, I want to talk about one of the low points. We had a referendum on a different voting system back in the second year of the coalition. It has been written, David Cameron had agreed tacitly that he wouldn't campaign and that the Conservatives wouldn't use the Liberal Democrats, being on the opposite side of the argument, they wouldn't use the unpopularity of the Liberal Democrats to make political hay. And then they did. Did you feel betrayed by David Cameron at that stage?
Listen, I've now been in politics long enough. My skin is terribly thick, but we get it the right way around. Look, I thought it was shoddy. I thought it was unnecessary. I didn't think they needed to win the argument by being quite so personal. I thought it's exactly the kind of thing that puts people off kind of politics. I wish that the referendum was fought on its merits, which was basically, should we continue with the deeply undemocratic way in which we elect MPs to the House of Commons or not. It wasn't. Look, what I have learned about the Conservatives, and you can actually see it in this election campaign, is when they think that they're about to lose their grip on something that they like, usually power, they can lash out, and they're doing it in this election campaign because it's dawning on them that they're not going to win this election campaign either. Does it surprise me? Does it worry me? Listen, don't go into politics if you want everyone to sort of treat each other with feather dusters. It's not like that.
Do you think there's a difference between Conservatives and their integrity and honour in the way they treat their coalition partners and the way, say, Labour might treat coalition partners?
I have no idea. I haven't been into coalition with the Labour. The Labour Party always strikes me as a very, very sort of tribal kind of machine as well. Look, I'm a Liberal Democrat. Don't ask Ed Miliband and David Cameron how they feel about being Labour and Liberal and Conservative politicians. I'm a Liberal Democrat. I am very proud of what we have done over the last 5 years to put the country on a better track. I think we have defied all the odds and all the expectations.
Well, you made 5 years for one thing, which a lot of people didn't think you would.
Hang on, and I'll tell you what we did in that process beyond everything else. Most importantly, I think we did the right thing for the country, for people's livelihoods, for the economic prosperity and security of the country. But we also did something else politically. We exploded the myth forever that the government of this country needs to be run as a sort of game of Buggins' term between the blue team and the red team, and they sort of play pass the parcel of the government. Because they'll tell you, and they'll sit on this chair, by the way, Ed Miliband and David Cameron, they'll say, we're going to become Prime Minister. They're not. They know in their heart of hearts they're not going to win outright majority. We are, I think, now moving into an era of coalition politics where people have to work together, and I think it is a very good thing that the Liberal Democrats, despite their huge pressure on us, despite all the vilification from right and left, that we held our nerve for these 5 years and showed the country that a kind of combination government of two parties can govern and can govern well.
We'll come back maybe to the issue of who you would like to be in government with next time, but I want to change tack now. I want to talk more about you and your background, and I'm going to play you another little clip. Now, this is you during the Olympic Games.
I'm not sure if I'm enjoying these clips.
No, this one is not an accusation. Right. It's you during the Olympic Games talking in Dutch to a Dutch television interview.
Right.
Let's have a look at it.
Maar ook, ik denk, ja, er is zo'n enorme steun. En iedereen die leeft met iedere minuut en iedere dag mee hier in Groot-Brittannië.
I didn't know the Dutch for enormous stone was enormous stone, but
that means enormous support.
Now, you've got a Dutch mum, a Dutch mother,
yep,
and a father who was Russian and British, I think. You're fluent in 5 languages, and I'm not trying to, by the way, suggest this is some sort of negative that we're accusing you of speaking foreign languages.
How dare the man speak other languages?
No, that would be ridiculous. But you said in an interview in 2010, I was aware as a youngster that, frankly, things seemed to work so much better in the Netherlands than they did in Britain. Just a feeling that something was holding this country back when large parts of Europe were palpably moving forward. Do you still think that?
No, I don't actually, but I think if you go back to the 70s and 80s, Britain was at the time riven by industrial conflict and then by quite a sort of ugly dog-eat-dog kind of politics under Margaret Thatcher that the much more consensual politics of the Netherlands didn't have at the time. I actually happen to think that we have, as a country, sort of moved on from them. But look, I'm 48 years old.
So which bit of Britain's history allowed us to move on? Because obviously the 70s, a lot of people think of as being a pretty bad time.
Yeah, it was a very dark time. And I remember those industrial disputes in the 70s where the lights kept going out, where rubbish was being piled on the streets. It wasn't like that in the Netherlands. It's just an obvious factual observation to make that the Britain of the early 1970s or whatever.
So did Margaret Thatcher, did Margaret Thatcher turn it round, do you think? Or was it Tony Blair or John Major? Because it's obviously turned round in your
As it happens,
view.
I don't think any single individual politician turns around. I think it's millions of British citizens doing good things for themselves and for their families. I think we became, over time, clearly a more competitive economy. We remained open. We've clearly got a lot of things we need to address. But the point, if I may say so, is not whether if you take Britain in 1970X and the Netherlands in, what's the beauty contest? It's, do I think as a politician that it is a good thing to try and have a kind of generous-spirited and open-minded view of the world, and that maybe, while we can no doubt teach many other countries good lessons about what we do right in this country, look, we're sitting here in this magnificent building where we excel in science in the world, hey, maybe there are some things that other countries can teach us as well. As a good example, something that I was just busy with earlier today, which was promoting vocational education, apprenticeships, and the virtue of learning and earning and doing practical things, not just academic qualifications. That is something, actually, as it happens, which whether it is in Germany or in Sweden or the Netherlands, they've been doing for generations, which we're now learning from them. So I don't apologise for a minute to being quite an open-minded politician who believes I am so proud to be British. I'm so proud to be British, but I'm also, I hope, modest enough to understand that if Britain wants to excel, it needs to remain generous-hearted and open-minded to the rest of the world as well.
Do you regret the nationalistic tenor of some British debate?
Yes, of course I do. Of course I do. I think one of the big debates in this election, in fact we're not having it enough, so thank you for asking me about it, is of course the central question for this general election is how do we make sure that we spread opportunity across what is still too segregated a society by obviously completing the job of economic recovery but doing so fairly. But the second big question is how do we remain as a country with our proud, open, trading nation history, how do we continue to remain an open country and not close? And I really worry that if you look at what Nigel Farage is saying, if you look at what significant parts of the Conservative Party are saying, they want to turn this country in on itself. And I think that would be a great tragedy. I think we should, of course, always remain a country open to business, not open to abuse. Not open to abuse.
Let me interrupt you. I think there's a slight perception, though, that people like yourself, speaking languages, multinational family background, well-to-do, lovely education, it somehow works out better for people like you than, say, the British working class who may have seen foreigners come here, undercut their wages and make life what feels like much more difficult for them.
Do you think there is that? You're saying because my mum happens to be Dutch, I don't understand the pressures on local public service. That's a ludicrous thing to say.
No, but do you see
can I challenge you on that? That's a deeply silly thing to say. That because my mother so happens to not have a British passport, I don't.
No. But I'm just asking whether you think there is a problem, or at least a perception among.
Of course, there's a problem. But that's a totally
swathes of the British population. You feel this is not a thing, a club that works for me.
But hang on a minute, playing a clip about I can speak Dutch.
It has nothing to do with you speaking Dutch.
Exactly.
But you're obviously more comfortable in the whole Brussels scene than most British people are going to be, aren't you?
What a ludicrous thing to say. I so happen to believe very strongly that there is, on immigration, if that's what you're asking about now, which is quite completely separate about whether I speak languages or not. I so happen to believe that there is good immigration and there's bad immigration, and I want to stop bad immigration. I don't think it is, of course it's not right that people come here illegally. Of course it's not right. I personally insisted, let me give you a very specific example.
Go on.
I personally insisted to insert into the coalition agreement that we reintroduce border controls, which had been taken away by previous governments, which, by the way, have just started this week, so that your passport, if you go to the Kent ports, will be checked as you leave the country just as much as you come in. Okay. Why did I personally insist on that? Because you cannot bear down on illegal immigration if you don't know who has overstayed their visa entitlement to be here. That is something I personally did. Whether I speak 5 languages
is irrelevant. To do with
exactly what you made that connection.
I just said in terms of your
you appear to make that connection, which is ludicrous.
Well, okay. Let me just ask you 2 single-word answer questions, because I want to get through a lot here. British population projections, the official projections, the ones on which our economic forecasts are based, say the population will be 70 million in 12 years' time. Are you comfortable with that?
I don't think there is some sort of magical ideal
so
number.
You are comfortable with that?
I don't think there is some number where you say if you're just shy of that number, it's okay. If you're not shy of that number, it's not. And by the way, these projections depend also on all sorts of factors about how many Brits go elsewhere.
No, these are the projections on which planning is based. Look, another one, maybe this one connects to this is maybe, some people would associate this with Holland, the Netherlands, maybe incorrectly. The Liberal Democrats have a more radical thought about drugs. Will cannabis be legalised, decriminalised, if the Liberal Democrats have their way?
There's a rather important distinction.
Yes,
I don't believe. No, it's very important. Actually, people make that confused. I don't think drugs should be legal. What I think is absolutely self-defeating is to chuck people into prison who need treatment and allow the Mr. Biggs and the criminals who peddle the drugs to them to go free. I think we should do what countries, for instance, like Portugal do, so it's not the Netherlands, but Portugal do, which is they treat people who need treatment to get them off their habit, and then you free up the resources to go after the people who should be behind bars, who are the Mr. Biggs and the criminal gangs who peddle the drugs to people in the first. Listen, if you are anti-drugs, which of course I am, I'm a dad of 3 little children. I don't want my kids hooked on drugs. I think you should be pro-reform because the war on drugs, and everybody knows this, is not working. Imprisoning people who need hospital treatment and allowing the criminals to go free surely is not a logical way of doing things.
Right. Good. End of the whole section which we discuss Europe, immigration and all those things. Let's look ahead a little bit at the government formation after this election, and as you say, unlikely to be a majority government. That's the consensus view at this stage. Could you work with the Conservatives again?
If the British people tell us, like last time, that the only way of governing this country sensibly from the Liberal centre ground is a Liberal Democrat Conservative coalition, just as much as if they tell us the only way to do it is a Labour Liberal Democrat coalition, of course the Liberal Democrats will look to see whether that's something we can and should do. Whether we will and whether we can do it in a way which is consistent with our values and our policies is something one
of the big dividing lines between you and them is welfare cuts.
Yeah.
Now they are proposing £12 billion a year of welfare cuts. You are proposing £3 billion of welfare cuts. You would not accept £12 billion. That's a red line if you went into coalition with
look, in exactly the same way that I just could never countenance recommending to the Liberal Democrats that we enter into coalition with a Labour Party that isn't serious about balancing the books, rather than this specious stuff they've come up with today, which still is sort of totally opaque about when they'll actually balance the books.
Talk to them about that next week.
Well, okay, please do, and ask them for a date, by the way, when they'll finally wipe the slate clean so that our kids and our grandkids don't pick up this generation's debts. Equally, I would not recommend to the Liberal Democrats that we enter into a coalition with the Conservatives if they insist on a plan which is willfully... Can I just point this out? Because it is a remarkable departure from what we've done in this coalition, where, as you said earlier, we have actually asked those from the broader shoulders to pay more through the tax system to balance the books.
Well, you've had 20 billion of welfare cuts in the last Parliament. They're proposing 12 in the next Parliament.
Hang on, it's very important, this. They're asking for 12 over 2 years. Right. We saved just shy of 20 over half a decade. They want to, by the way, ask the poorest to make those additional sacrifices at the same time as saying to the richest that they don't need to pay an extra penny through the tax system to balance the books. That is downright unfair.
Help us out. What is the kind of point between their 12 and your 3, which is where the line comes?
I think what is important is not some magic number.
Well, it is a magic number because that's what it's going to come down to.
No, it doesn't. No, actually, it doesn't.
Actually have a number.
No, it's what you propose. So let me give you an example. It's not just the number; it's what you do to save them. I mean, what is the effect? Right. Is it fair?
Because you've said they would hit children and hit the disabled.
Yes.
So what would you do? What is the deal, the potential deal that you can do with Conservatives? We're entitled to ask this because...
that you ask the wealthiest to pay more of a contribution. You shouldn't let them off completely
scot-free.
And
in welfare cuts, out of 12 billion...
Look, I'm no slouch when it comes to welfare.
You'll go above 3 billion, though. You can imagine going above 3 billion. I'm no slouch when it comes to welfare savings,
but the 3 billion that we have come up with is what we think is a reasonable approach, which, for instance, involves some very wealthy pensioners, for instance, not having their TV licences and their winter fuel payments paid for by...
So you can get more than 3 billion without hitting children and the disabled, as you've said they would be doing.
Look, if it's not the number, it's the principle that it should be fair.
Could you conceive of getting more than £3 billion? I'm just trying to sort of look ahead to what could be a negotiation.
I haven't.
This is the new system, the new politics.
Exactly. And I'm giving you a very simple answer, which is we looked, and I asked David Laws and Danny Alexander to do this forensically. We looked at all of the money that is spent on benefits, and we decided that and £3 billion, by the way, is no small number.
No,
that is
it
a
isn't.
lot of money. For most normal people, that's an unimaginably large amount of money. We think we can make £3 billion worth of savings from welfare in a way that is fair, that doesn't discriminate and hurt the most vulnerable. We don't think remotely the concern. I mean, £12 billion, which I don't want to take, is 4 times as much as we spend as a country on job seekers allowance every single. It's about exactly what we spend on disability living allowance. Do they want to scrap all help through the disability living allowance for those who are disabled?
Let's not talk about their politics. Let's finish with some thoughts about your legacy, if you like, for the Liberal Democrats. You've said you took them into government. You've made some very difficult decisions. It's been a difficult time. I mean, if your party is obliterated in the election,
It won't be.
If it is,
It won't
will
be.
it have been worth it?
Well, don't ask me. It won't be.
Okay. Let me ask you a non-hypothetical question.
Yeah.
Your party membership, you've lost what, about a third of the membership? You've lost 10 out of your 11 MEPs.
Our party membership's gone up. Our party membership has gone up consistently over the last several months. It's
Yes,
now about
over the last several months.
Well,
but over the last 5 years, you've lost members.
Evan, we are
You've lost members in the last 5 years.
first governing party that has seen membership go back up.
Have you lost members or gained members in the last 5 years?
We have lost members,
right.
but now they're
Thank
going
you.
back up again.
So
we
you've
have
lost
45,
members,
over
you've lost
45,000.
MEPs, and you've lost an enormous number of council seats.
Yeah.
Has it been worth it?
Yes. Of course it has, and any Liberal Democrat will tell you that, because at the end of the day, what the Liberal Democrats could have done, and we took this big collective decision, and the reason we've been so much more resilient, and I think graceful under fire as a party, is we took this decision it wasn't just a sort of whimsical decision by me, we took it as a sort of democratic party, and we decided that notwithstanding the impact on our short-term political popularity, it was the right thing for the country. And at a time when people are so cynical about politics and so fed up with politicians, isn't it a good thing that a party, a plucky, brave party, put country before party? And I have an old-fashioned belief that if you do the right thing for the country, for the nation that you love and that you want to serve, there are plenty of fair-minded folk out there who will recognise that. Was it all exactly as we would predict? Of course not. Was every single decisions I would relish? No.
And you
but
would say
overall, is the
this-
country better now than it was when we found it teetering on the edge of an economic precipice back in 2010? You bet.
And you would say this irrespective of whatever the result is on May the 7th.
Well, I so happen to believe that...
I know you think it's going to be a better result than everybody says, but
I'm always fascinated when people ask campaigning politicians to make predictions. I'm not a soothsayer. I don't have a crystal ball. I'm a campaigning politician who believes that the worst thing...
I'm not asking you to predict. I'm saying you believe that it was the right thing to do, even if it means you lose half your MPs.
I believe
or
it was the right
three-quarters
thing
of
to
your
do, and I
MPs.
believe that the right thing to do for the country now is to not lurch to the right or the left, but to remain anchored in the liberal, decent, compassionate, open-minded centre ground, which is where I think the country should be if it wants to thrive and prosper in the future.
Nick Clegg, I wonder whether you're struck as I am, that you have very eloquently set out your case and your record over the last 5 years in this half hour. And it must gall you, it must grate that there are probably a lot of people who've been watching your lips move, hearing the words come out, and they're thinking, I just don't believe what this man says because of that one thing, tuition fees.
Look, I just accept there are some people for whom that is a sticking point and they won't forgive, they won't forget, and I accept that. I do. Is it a little bit galling to see Ed Miliband not apologise for crashing the economy? Is it a little bit galling to see David Cameron spectacularly break a promise when he said he'd bring net immigration down to tens of thousands? I told him not to, by the way, and still not apologise. I've had to apologise musically. I do so with as good grace as I can, and I hope there are enough fair-minded folk out there, perhaps not those who won't let go of that particular issue, who will acknowledge, when all is said and done, that the Liberal Democrats have tried to do the right thing with the right motives, with fairness and compassion at the heart of everything that we do at a time of unprecedented national difficulty.
Nick Clegg, thank you very much indeed.
For the next Leader interview, Evan Davis talks to Prime Minister and leader of the Conservative Party, David Cameron. That's here on BBC One, Wednesday night at 7:30.